And joining us live and exclusive now is Reuven Azar. He is the new Israeli ambassador to India. He takes over at a critical time in the war, right before this conflict is a year old. Ambassador Azar, welcome to India Today Studios.
Thank you, Shiv, and happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Let's get straight to the big questions at this time. Ambassador, the northern front of Israel in Lebanon is where all the quote-unquote action is right now. And I hesitate to use the word action because there are very serious things happening there. We've seen pagers exploding. I'll come to that in just a moment. But the airstrikes that have taken place in the last 48 to 72 hours are said to be aimed at completely debilitating the Hezbollah. How is that going? 585 people killed, at least 2,000 people apparently injured. Is Israel achieving what it is setting out to do?
Well, Israel is trying to achieve a ceasefire for the last 11 months since Hezbollah, in an unprovoked way, attacked Israel on the 8th of October. And the aim of our policy is to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701 that states very clearly that Hezbollah is not allowed to deploy on the Israeli border. If Hezbollah agrees to that, then there will be no war. There will be immediate ceasefire. But unfortunately, what is happening in the last few months, that despite diplomatic efforts led by the United States, this is not happening. And we have evacuated 70,000 people out of their homes in northern Israel as a result of these Hezbollah attacks. So we are determined to achieve our goal because our people want to go back to their homes. And in order to achieve that, we are now employing more force.
Yeah.
And what we did is that we targeted 1,700 military targets, most of them inside homes in villages in South Lebanon, to which Hezbollah introduced weapons and missiles, breaching international law, using in an immoral way the fact that there are civilians there in order to conceal weapons. We have gathered that intelligence, and actually, before we started, we encouraged all the people that are living in those places or near those places to evacuate immediately. This came in telephone calls, in flyers, in radio transmissions, in every possible way. And thanks to that, the number of casualties actually is pretty low compared to the number of targets that we have targeted.
But Ambassador, some would ask, when the Israeli Prime Minister and the government have called for an evacuation of civilians, aren't these people, by Israel's own claim, being held there against their will as human shields? Where are they to go if they are asked to evacuate? If they are being oppressed by the Hezbollah, as the Israeli government claims, where would these civilians go is a question that many are asking.
Unlike the Gaza situation, in which Hamas actually shot at people at gunpoint and tried to prevent the evacuation, here you have a different situation because the territory of the southern Lebanon is wider, and we have seen tens of thousands of people, according to reports of the Lebanese government, already 500,000 people actually have been evacuating from these areas, which is a positive thing if we want to avoid more civilian casualties. But we are determined, Chief, we are determined to restore peace to our region, and therefore these capabilities that were built with Iranian support, with financial support, with training, with transfer of technology, this has to stop.
Yeah.
And we are determined. The Israeli public is united in the decision to do whatever it takes in order to remove this threat. And again, this could stop tomorrow or even today if Hezbollah commits and the Lebanese government commits to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701.
Was there a tipping point? What was the trigger point, Ambassador? Because it's difficult to tell because there's so much happening. But, I was there in October and November last year for 3 weeks. And the Hezbollah, which is most certainly the most well-armed, perhaps the most well-organized of the Iranian proxies, the three H's, the Houthis, Hamas and Hezbollah, they've been, mounting concerted attacks, especially in the northern part of Israel, using anti-tank weapons, long-range drones and things like that. What was the trigger point now for this sudden shift in Israeli might towards southern Lebanon?
Well, it's connected to the fact that, first
or
of all...
was it preemptive?
Yeah, it was connected to the fact that, first of all, we couldn't, on the 7th of October, deal simultaneously with all the threats. We have a strong army, but it's not that big.
Yeah.
And we had to organize ourselves. We had to deal, first of all, with the threat coming from Gaza. And we did that. So in Gaza, you have a situation today in which most of the threat, the missile factories, the stockpiles, that has been dealt with. The Hamas army is defeated. They still have sporadic terrorist attacks at our forces. Basically, militarily, we've done the job there. We created a buffer zone. So Hamas cannot attack now Israel. It's a problem for them to contraband weapons from the Sinai because we are sealing the border. So once we have done that, we had the time to reorganize and to plan what we're going to do in the north. Before we started, we actually tried again to create a situation in which we avoid that, because we know that the price of war is terrible and the loss of every life is tragic. So our job as a democracy, as a country that is responsible for the life of its citizens, we have not only the right, we have the duty to protect them, but we have to do whatever we can in order to try to avoid violence. That's what we did. We waited for 11 months, and now it's time for the other side to understand that if they continue this, they are going to pay a dear price.
Could there be a ground invasion or a ground operation in Lebanon? It's not a far-fetched question because it has happened before. Israel has perceived to be a larger threat than just what is immediately being dealt with. And many experts and observers believe that the current airstrikes are basically clearing the decks for a large-scale ground operation or an invasion of Lebanon.
We are preparing for all scenarios. The IDF forces, our defense forces, have operative plans. We have recruited the necessary personnel, and we are completely ready to do that. We prefer not to do that, and we don't want to, escalate into a full-fledged war. But if we don't have any choice, we will have to do it because we have to create a situation in which our citizens can live in peace in their homes.
Speaking of Iran for a moment, because after the assassination of the Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, Ambassador Azar, there had been almost a kind of suspense, a tension around the region and globally about how Iran was going to hit back. Now, a direct attack of any kind or what was perhaps in people's minds, that hasn't happened yet. What is Israel's assessment of that? Because one would have imagined that a country like Iran, struck in the manner that it has, even though Israel has not taken or claimed credit for that assassination, the idea of a direct Iranian involvement still sort of hangs in the air. It hasn't happened.
It hasn't happened, and I think for good reason. Last time that Iran attacked us with a barrage of 300 missiles, rockets, and drones, and ballistic missiles.
Yeah, that was in April this year.
That was on the 13th of April, and that barrage was successfully foiled by Israel and its partners in the region, including Arab states, including the United States and other Western armies.
Yeah.
The Iranians understood what our capabilities are. And although we haven't retaliated in a massive way, we have shown through a very targeted, in a very targeted way, what our capabilities are. I think that the Iranians are going to do a huge mistake if they decide to involve themselves here again. And we are ready for that scenario as well.
Speaking, one final question on Lebanon before we shift back to Gaza, Ambassador. These airstrikes, when they take place, they obviously don't take place for a short time. It looks like this is a precursor to a larger operation, and these airstrikes might actually continue. Does Israel, apart from the UN resolution that you were talking about, is there some kind of an end point as far as these operations in the north are concerned?
Well, we have to restore the deterrence that was breached. As you know, since 2006, Hezbollah refrained from shooting at our country, and they decided to change that policy. They made a huge mistake. They thought that Israel is vulnerable. They have accumulated all these weapons around Israel, not only in the Gaza Strip and in Lebanon, but also in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. And the Iranians thought that actually they can successfully choke the state of Israel. and that we are not going to be able to sustain that, well, they were mistaken.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, these miscalculations create conflicts. You are an experienced journalist and you covered many conflicts, and you know that when people do miscalculations when it comes to the use of force, that bears a huge price. Unfortunately, we are in a situation in which this miscalculation led to a lot of casualties. The responsibility for all these dead people are on the shoulders of the Iranians, of these radicals that are turning our region into complete havoc. So we have a responsibility, together with our partners in the Arab world and our countries that are friendly to the cause, we have the responsibility to restore peace, to create a security regime that will be sustainable for the future, so we don't have to deal with this kind of threats in the coming future.
Speaking about those pagers exploding, this is one of those typical operations where, there are a lot of claims and counterclaims. Once again, there's very little clarity over, where things actually came from. Throw some light on that, because most people say, why is there even a discussion or an argument on this? Of course, this was an intelligence operation by Israel to infiltrate the Hezbollah and teach them a lesson with those exploding pagers, Ambassador.
Well, look, I cannot comment on a specific operation, whether Israel was involved or wasn't involved. What I think is important for the audience to understand is that war is changing all the time, and the nature of war is changing all the time. And in the past, you used to have either conventional armies that acted according to certain rules, more or less, and you had terrorist organizations that used to breach every rule, but they didn't possess advanced technology. What we are having today, as a direct result of the Iranian involvement in supplying technologies and training to these terrorists, is that you have terrorist armies that are equipped with sophisticated weapons and with capabilities that even conventional armies don't have. These proxies know how to do cyber attacks. This is something unimaginable, and unfortunately, this is what the world is going to get in the near future unless we defeat them. And therefore, for countries that respect the law and follow norms, it is very hard to deal with these people that abuse every norm and use our values against us by firing from hospitals, by manipulating media, and things like that. And therefore, we also have to think outside the box if we want to defeat the terrorists.
Has the last 1 year been a surprise to the Israeli system in terms of the technology and capabilities that have been obtained by some of these groups? Like you said, cyber attacks. We've seen some long-range drone attacks as well, guided munitions.
Well, actually, when it comes to cyber and to drone attacks, this is something that we've been watching very carefully and preparing against. As you probably know, Israel possesses capabilities when it comes to missile defense and drone defense that like almost no other country in the world. So we've been able to foil more than 90% of the attacks that are coming from the air. It's not an impermeable system, but it's one of the best systems in the world. Also, when it comes to cyber, actually Israel is one of the most attacked countries in cyber in the world. We have huge amounts of thousands of attacks every day. And we've been able, thankfully, since the 7th of October, to sustain all the attacks against us and maintain resilience and functionality of all our systems, not only the military systems, but also the civilian systems. Now, of course, the 7th of October was a huge surprise, and it was a failure, both intelligence failure and operational failure when it comes to the Gaza Strip itself. The question is, how fast can you recover from that? And thankfully, I think that Israeli society has shown immense amounts of voluntarism, of dedication, of conviction, and of cooperation in order to deal with the threat. We had to reinvent the wheel to a certain extent when it comes to fighting, for example, the tunnel threat. We probably didn't imagine that we would have to invade the Gaza Strip the way we did, because we left the Gaza Strip in 2005 without an intention to go back. Unfortunately, Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in 2007, got rid of the Palestinian Authority, killed them, threw them out of buildings, And this is the reality that we have to face.
Is the obliteration of Hamas, an objective that is within sight, within grasp of Israel?
Well, the term obliteration has to be looked at.
Yeah.
We are talking about military obliteration.
Yeah.
We know that ideology is something that is very difficult to root out, and this requires an effort from the international community to de-radicalize, because what has happened since 2007 is that Hamas has been indoctrinating children from the age of 2 to kill Jews, okay, to commit their lives to struggle against Israel. And this has to change. If we want to achieve peace at some point in time, we need to follow the steps of countries that have successfully de-radicalized, like the UAE, like the efforts Morocco is doing, like Saudi Arabia is doing. So there are examples to follow, and if we really want to have a future with our neighbors, and we want to have self-rule for the Palestinians, we will have to find partners that will help us to de-radicalize that society.
But Ambassador, whichever way you slice it, whichever account you accept as being close to the reality, what's happened in Gaza has resulted in a huge loss of life, possibly a lot of civilian life as well. What is Israel's assessment of it? Because Israel has been accused variously of genocide, of not really caring about civilian life during these attacks. Not for the first time Israel's been accused of that. What is Israel's assessment of how much civilian life has been lost? And again, I add the disclaimer that many of these civilians may not have had a choice to move away because of the presence of the Hamas.
Yeah, so primarily civilians in Gaza have been hijacked by Hamas, okay? That's the sad reality. And what Israel has done is really unprecedented in terms of efforts of any modern army to take people out of harm's way, because we have developed tactics that no other Western army
But that
has
still
developed.
resulted in a huge loss of life.
Well, of course, every loss of life is tragic. But first of all, you have to take the data that is coming from Hamas with some salt.
I agree.
Because they have been including in these numbers people that have died as a result of misfire of their own rockets, natural deaths, and they have, according to their counting, no terrorist was killed. We killed more than 15,000, according to our estimates. So when you look at the ratio between terrorist hit and civilians, and you compare it to other urban scenarios that we've seen, for example, in the fight against ISIS in Mosul, there the ratio was 1 terrorist for 8 civilian casualties. Here in Gaza you have a ratio of 1 to 1.5 or 1 to 2, which actually is completely unprecedented given the deepness of the embedding of terrorists in the civilian population and the tactics that they have perfected in the abuse of installations that should be impugned according to international law. But international humanitarian law also says that when these installations are abused and are breached by terrorists, they cease to be impugned. So as much as we made an effort to avoid casualties, at the end of the day, many people have died, regrettably. But these accusations of genocide are completely fabricated because, people are using terms without understanding what these terms are. In the Gaza Strip, when we entered the Gaza Strip the first time in 1967, there were 200,000, less than 200,000 Palestinians. Do you know how many Palestinians there are now in Gaza? More than 2 million. So what kind of genocide is that? Okay, it's completely fabricated, and it's basically, perpetrated by media outlets that support radical Islam, like Al Jazeera and other media outlets that are daily trying to create blood libels against Israel.
Ambassador, you spoke about radicalization and that, military obliteration is one thing, but like we've seen in this West Asian crisis, it works like a cycle. The violence comes in cycles, then there's a period of peace, and then it erupts once again. We've seen it between Israel and Palestine a number of times. You've served in the military and as a diplomat in all your years, so you know it better than most people. My question now is, this time round, is it going to be just another cycle, some kind of, terms will come on the table, there will be a period of peace, but no real assurance that things won't flare up again? Because after this much violence, an entire generation will probably be ready for radicalization once again. And that's what the Palestinians have said before as well. You kill one of us, more will come out.
Well, there is several elements that come as an answer to that.
Yeah.
First of all, the fact that Palestinians in Gaza were indoctrinated for the last 17 years to attack Israel has resulted in the 7th of October. So saying that our response to the 7th of October is going to radicalize the Palestinian population in Gaza, this is complete nonsense, because they have been radicalized before the attack. Okay, that's number one. Number two, look, the region of West Asia, as a result of the absolute chaos that came after the Arab Spring and the failure of the Arab state system, has created chaos and radicalism. And you have it in countries that are disintegrated for a long period of time with no connection to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So 500,000 victims of the civil war in Syria have nothing to do with Israel. Okay? 10 million people that are suffering starvation in Sudan have nothing to do with Israel. 1 million people that have been killed in Iraq in the last 2 decades have nothing to do with Israel. The civil war in Yemen has nothing to do with Israel. But what is the common denominator in all these conflicts is that you have radical elements that have arisen as a result of the decay of the Arab state system, and there are cynical players like Iran that are manipulating the situation in order to gain hegemony in the region. So as long as the international community doesn't put pressure on Iran, we are going to continue to suffer from these conflicts, and we'll have to defend ourselves time after time after time.
As a former soldier, as a career diplomat who's seen the good and the bad of this constant effort to make some kind of equilibrium in peace, do you think something should be done differently this time around, Ambassador?
Yes, I think that I'm very optimistic, and I'll tell you why. Because what I'm seeing during this conflict is that our partners in the Arab world haven't backed off or haven't backed down from their positions to confront this radicalism and to stay in touch with us. We've been cooperating quite deeply, both in intelligence and operationally. We've been able to create a shield to the skies of the region against the Iranian attack. Okay? And if we show resolution together with our Western partners, with other countries that want peace, like India and other countries, we can create a corridor of security and stability and peace and prosperity in the West Asia, because we have enough partners to do that. The only thing that we have to show is resolution against the radicals. We have to have the backing of international organizations, of the US, and if people are going to think that West Asia is a lost cause and there is no reason why to continue investing in this region, then of course those who want to terrorize the region will win. We want to prevent that, and Israel will not move from the region.
One final question, Ambassador, in that case, speaking of partners, India, as you know, does have special relationships in this region with Israel, with Palestine, with all of your neighbors as well. Do you see some kind of a special role for India in whatever unfolds now?
Well, I think that India has an increasing role in our region, not only because it has interests in the region, but also because very important players in the region want to engage with India in different ways. So I think that once this war is over, we'll be able to go back to plans that we had to create a corridor of connectivity between Asia and Europe. This is in the cards. This is achievable, and I'm sure that India will be a major part of this effort.
We look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks for taking our questions here in India Today, Ambassador Reuven Azar of Israel. It's a story that we will continue to track very, very closely right here.